All right. Okay, welcome everyone to the February 2022 Circulation Committee meeting. Sorry, this one's been a little delayed. Usually we would do this in January, but we're doing it in February. So here we are. Okay. If you, I just saw in the chat, if you are in a situation where you can't, speak on mic or anything like that, don't worry too much about it. We will try to keep an eye on the chat window, just to make sure, that when we get to the discussion points that we have, are sharing that feedback or at the very least pointing out, sometimes the chat will move a little bit too fast, but we'll at least try to point out there's an interesting discussion going on in the chat. Please, check it out, that sort of thing. So I am going to, this one, we may not go the whole 2 hours. I have yet to have anyone be mad at me for that. So apologies though if this does end up being a shorter meeting, but if we have an active discussion, it might be a longer one. And I will have Kendall jump in for the reciprocity discussion, just because, as we're discussing this, there may be, questions about what the system can and can't do that we'll need his, kind of input on. And I've got someone else. Okay, good, thank you. So I'm just gonna briefly share my screen. I'll probably pop in and out of screen share as we go, but I'll just share it in the Word document. This is our agenda here, but basically the exciting part is that Williamsfield is now processing holds. That's our big membership update. So just be aware that if you do see items popping up, to and from Williamsfield, nearby libraries. So Galesburg is probably going to be the one with the most, but you may hear from them about, sending you a list of reciprocal deletions and things like that. It doesn't look like there's quite as much overlap as we were worried about, but all the same, don't be surprised to start seeing more stuff going to Williamsfield and coming to you from Williamsfield. I will note that we've already had some labeling issues. The W's and the S's in particular in our membership list have a lot of library names that are easy to confuse for each other. And in this case, I would say Williamsfield and Wethersfield schools are the ones that are most likely to be messed up. So just as you're labeling materials, kind of until you get used to it, just pay a little bit of extra attention to the codes and make sure that you're, labeling materials to send them to the correct location. The next thing on the point, and thank you to Carla from Macomb for bringing this up. It was also something I'd planned to have on the thing. Anyway, we are kind of in the middle on our website on the parameters page. There are some things that are, lists of user profiles, things like that. A few months ago, we just kind of started a project. Sarah's working on a wonderful document that's kind of a guide to all the user profiles and what they do in a little bit more plain language. But then as we started working on that, we realized that the master list of user profiles and how they function is out of date, last updated in 2016. And as I've been working through that, because I found a few things where certain lines were erroneously copy pasted, there's been a ton of profiles added since 2016. So getting that document updated has proven to be a slightly larger scale project than we originally thought it was going to be. So I apologize for the delays on that, but we are working on that. But we have also noticed some inconsistencies, and most of them seem to be things that are just flat out mistakes, things where it either got entered wrong on the spreadsheet or entered wrong in workflows. The one that Carla had brought to our attention was that hold limits for regular adult profiles are different than hold limits for non-RSA adult profile, in the sense that the non-RSA adult profile has can place 5 more holds than the regular adult profile. And I asked Kendall, there was no grand reason that we wanted it that way. It was just a mistake. So we're going to try to kind of catch those inconsistencies and correct them as we do this. So in this case, it'll probably be, all of kind of the regular adult profiles will probably all have the 25 item hold limit. All of the Juve profiles will have the 15 item hold limit. Things like that. We're going to try to bring those into alignment somewhat more and correct those. But if you happen to be looking at the old version of that sheet and you notice a line that makes you go, well, that doesn't make any sense. I may regret saying this, but feel free to email me about it, because that is something that we're kind of, I'm trying to kind of look through and catch the things where it's just kind of like, that doesn't seem like that was how we wanted this to be set up. So if you spot another one, let me know and I will add that to my list. And, some of those we're going ahead and correcting in the system, but, getting the new document up may take slightly longer. So if though, the other thing I just mostly want to say is if you do have questions about how a specific user profile works and you're either looking at that document and it's not on there because it's so out of date, or you're looking at it and you're like, that just doesn't make a lick of sense, feel free to give us a call. We can access, how those accounts are really set up. Also, this may help us identify another column on the old spreadsheet where things were copied and pasted wrong. So, don't be shy about reaching out to us if you do notice something more weird about that one. My team, if you want to forward all those calls to me, I guess go for it. But no, I mean, since I am kind of midstream on that, updating that project. So also apologies for the delays on that, because it has just kind of turned out to be a little bit more exciting than originally anticipated. I thought I was going to be adding a line for cards for kids and cards for vets and then moving on with life, but it turned out not to be. So, but sometimes it's like that. Another thing that came up, just because we kind of had questions that came in about it this week, and it was one of those areas where we sort of internally had to check our own knowledge about it. So I figured it was probably worth bringing up in this meeting, is kind of what does not increment circulation counter really mean, and what gets counted as a stat and what doesn't. And basically, there's a lot of profiles on that list where it notes this does not increment circulation or charge counter. Maybe I may have phrased that wrong. It might be charge counter, not circulation counter. What that means is that if I'll use LU's NCNT profile as an example. So say you have an internal use library card, like a TS card, and you have set this up using the LU's NCNT profile. That profile does not increment the charge counter. So when you check an item out to that card, it doesn't increase the circulation statistics on that item. But it does still treat it as you have done a checkout at the library. It's just not counting it associated with that specific item. Like the checkout would still show up if we did like an item history or something like that, but is not incrementing this item has been checked out 2 times count, basically. But when you're looking at circulation stats, it is going to include that item in terms of X number of items have been checked out at your library. So it's a little bit confusing. And I used that LU's profile because that's one, like a lot of the very obvious profiles, like the discard profile, a lot of the Blue Cloud reports are set up to exclude a lot of those profiles that aren't things that you would really want to count. Like you don't want the things you're checking out to your discard user to count toward your circulation, probably. So those are excluded from that. Things that are checked out to, well, let's see, I'm trying to think. Discard and like display, I think, is another one that's commonly, scanner is another profile that's commonly excluded from those reports. Again, if you're looking at a specific report and you want to be sure about what is excluded from that in terms of user profiles, we can help you figure that out on the specific report. But just I guess it was one of those things where internally we had a little confusion about it. So I figured it was a good time to remind folks that there's sort of a difference between those two factors. So not counting it on an item versus not counting it as a checkout at all. As far as I can tell, there's no way to just make workflows ignore the fact that you have done a checkout. But what we can do is exclude certain user profiles from certain reports, basically. So, if you ever do have concerns, there's also ways that we could maybe assist you by like adding a user profile column, and then you can filter by user profile or something like that on a Blue Cloud report. That's more of a report by report question. But, anyway, I hope that made at least a tiny bit of sense. I feel like I'm rambling slightly. Does anyone have any questions though, or discussion about that? Or has anyone noticed anything else that things that make you go, on that spreadsheet? Would anyone like to see the spreadsheet that I'm talking about? Since I've just been talking about this thing with no context. All right, I am not, yes, please. Okay, let me do a new share. Actually, I should just share my, okay. The spreadsheet I'm talking about is on the support site, which will eventually load. Okay. And it is here under system parameters. Down here under the one I'm working on is the user profile differences, which I may need to tell it to change the share again here. This is what the document looks like. And so the one we were specifically talking about was that, adult has 25, but non-RSA adult has 30, and that's not intentional. It's supposed to be 25 for both. So we're going to work on getting that fixed. And the hold limit was the one where a whole bunch had unlimited copied and pasted in there. And then when I went into the system, I was like, wait a minute, those have limits. So that was a fun day. But anyway, so that's that. Let me go back to my Firefox. All right, because I have everything. There's my agenda again. So, okay, so the next thing I have on my agenda is billing reminders. This is just a very minor thing. Please remember that if you are sending money to another library for an item that, like a patron has paid for a lost item at your library, but the item belongs to another library, when you are sending them the money, please don't make it a mystery what the money's for. Please include item ID and item information and patron information so that when they receive a check for $25.99, the library that is receiving it knows what it's for. One of those things where it has come up just a couple of times recently where people have gotten sort of mystery payments. Just small review there. And then also just small reminder that in those situations, the more libraries can communicate with each other, the better. The way the policy is written, we do not, if you have a patron standing in front of you who is ready to pay for an item, I would say, I think the way it's phrased in the policy is that we recommend that you reach out to the item owning library and just kind of check in with them, but we do not require you to find out what their processing fee is or to charge that. That is not currently required under the policy. Many libraries do choose to do that as a courtesy. I think it sounds like a lovely idea, but the way the policy is currently written, it is not required. So just also be aware of that, basically, which did kind of lead me in why the whole, the item type, not item type, item number 4 on the agenda has appeared, which is the circulation review. In terms of, this is something that I feel like it's kind of worth going over every now and again, sort of which rules are charge library versus which rules are owning library. So, and the one that, you know, as an example in the previous one, the processing fee is based on the checkout library's rules. Basically, when you check an item out, it is that library's Cirque rules, it is that library's renewal rules, it is that library's processing fee. A lot of this is, you know, it's impractical to ask libraries to know each other's processing fees. If y'all ever wanted to standardize processing fees across the board, that's probably a conversation that we would be open to having. But right now they do vary. Some libraries don't use processing fees at all and just kind of build that cost into the item cost when they're cataloging the item. But basically, processing fees though, and if you look at it from the perspective of like frontline library staff, when you're checking out an item or you're dealing with a patron who thinks they might have lost something or thinks they might have lost several things, you kind of want to be able to tell them it's the cost of the item plus a $2 processing fee, as opposed to if they've lost, you know, 10 items, to be like, well, on this one it's the cost of the item plus the $2 processing fee. On this one it's the cost of the item plus a $5 processing fee. On this one it's just the cost of the item. That becomes very, very difficult to explain to a patron. So it's this way, it's just the checkout libraries and they have to remember one rule. So that's kind of, and also for items that are automatically billed by the system because of time, it's not charging, you know, it's not doing library by library processing fees. So we didn't feel like it was reasonable to expect library staff to manually take a step that the system is not able to take, is sort of the logic there. Ooh, I will share with, why not send out an email about processing fees? What's the high, what's the low? I think it would be worth standardizing. That is, honestly, I think so too. But, you know, I am also in a mode of let's standardize everything. That may be a larger, a conversation larger than just this committee, but I'll maybe add it to Kendall's list of things that might have potential for standardization. And then with processing fees, if the owning library has it listed on the RSA spreadsheet and it's more than what they charge, go ahead and add that if the patron is wanting to pay right then and there. And like I said, that is, you know, if that is something that you want to do as a courtesy, you know, to your other libraries, that is completely fine and you know, even maybe encouraged, but it is not required. Yeah, this is one of those areas where we sort of hope that it comes out in the wash and that maybe occasionally you know, get if someone pays a processing fee at another library that's more than what you would charge, but in return, occasionally someone pays in another library a processing fee that's less than what you would charge. And so we hope that it evens out over time. But, you know, I do know a few libraries. I've spoken to directors of at least a couple of libraries who are just kind of like, we did away with them altogether. We just figured we would make the item cost when we catalog the items, whatever we needed to spend to replace it, and then not even have to worry about it. I mean, it seems like a valid approach to me. I don't know. Maybe there's an unintended consequence of it somewhere, but I don't know. So the other thing though is fun with the Cirque Map. I'm going to go back to the RSA support site and just show you kind of where to find the Cirque Map. It's again under system parameters. And here we have the expanded Cirque Map. This is automatically updated during the first week of every month, but I'm going to have to open it. All right, let me switch my screen share here. Okay, so when we talk about the Cirque Map, this is what we're talking about, and this is available, like you saw from the website for anyone to look at. And you can kind of see, so when we're talking about the Cirque Map, and as we start talking about, the ideas of standardizing new item types and things like that, that I guess comes up a little bit more in the hold map as we get into the reciprocity conversation. But it's sort of a similar thing. But you can see here, I'll use Atkinson as a default because they're early in the alphabet. But you can see here basically their rules. They've got a default rule that well, actually, am I remembering this right? Yeah. If I'm remembering this correctly, the Cirque Map, the system reads the Cirque Map from bottom up. So that's why almost every library, the default rule is at the top. And then there are other rules below it, so that as the system reads the Cirque Map to figure out how to treat a specific item, it hits all the specific things first. And then if an item doesn't meet any of those item types, kind of criteria before, like if it's not an ILL user profile or a staff profile or whatever, then it'll go up. And then if it's a Blu-ray, then it hits this line and applies this rule. But then if none of the others apply, then it hits the default rule and it checks that out for 14 days, max fee, 5 cents a day overdue fee. So this is kind of where your specific fees for specific item types come into play, or if you have specific loan periods for different patron types, that sort of thing, like this non-Cirque book this is kind of unusual, but they have an overnight policy for certain item types, 7 days for DVDs. So I just figured it might not be a terrible idea to just kind of go over this a little bit. So basically, though, the things we care about in the Cirque Map are your user profiles and your item types. So this is why when we talk about standardizing, these are the things we kind of focus on, is because those item types are what makes all this work. So we'll get into it a little bit in this meeting, and I have invited Kendall for that part of the conversation. I'll be chatting him when we get closer to it to join us. But this is why, though, when we are having these conversations about standardization and reciprocity, why item type is such an important part of that conversation. But also, I kind of want to bring it up just because, as sort of hopefully to maybe somewhat comfort some folks, because item type doesn't necessarily have that much to do with, it might, you might use item type to designate some of this, but it doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with where in the library you put it. That in theory is like home location. So say you have new materials that you keep in a special shelving area, but you don't actually have a special circulation rule for those new materials, then it makes more sense, not to tread in cataloging waters, but it makes more sense to use the home location to designate those items as new, potentially, than to use the item type to designate it if you don't need them to behave differently. But more to come on the whole item type standardization conversation, because we may be looking at, a whole bunch of things specifically to do that. So, but the way things are now, it's just, I guess I just sort of wanted to review kind of where all this goes and where it comes from and all of that sort of thing, so that you have a little bit more background, I guess. The next thing I just kind of figured I would include, because it's something that only recently clicked for me, is, how bills are processed, and the fact that does that is reflected in the what's the word I want? Sorry, switching my screen share. In the status of the item. So an item that is billed as lost because it has just been kept too long, that ends up with a location of lost assume, whereas lost claim is if you use the wizard, the mark item lost wizard to mark it, then it's lost claim. So just if anyone was ever curious. So it is actually, whether it was done manually, whether this versus whether the system did it is at least somewhat reflected in the item. I guess that's current location. So I don't know. Anyone have any question about any of that? That was a lot and kind of broad and rambly.
Anna, do you know off the top of your head what the location for an item is if a library uses claims returned on it?
Oh God, please don't use claims returned.
Yeah, I hate it, but
I want to say it might be. Well, I don't know that it changes. I'll have to test that. Actually, I might have to claim I returned an item and see if it changes. Let me see. Do I have something checked out that I can do that with real quick? I have to apologize to Alpha Park because this one poor item I have done so much testing with. Mark item play just returned. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I know it's fun to like listen to someone click. There we go. It kind of didn't really do it. I mean, I tried it by right clicking. Is it under special? Try doing it the real way with the wizard. Mark items claims return. Did we somehow disable that function? Well, apparently I somehow can't claim I returned things, so that's a new one on me. Well, double don't use claims returned because it also just seems to flat out not be working at all right now. So don't use claims returned because I can't make it work. I tried it through the app and through right click shortcuts. So yeah, it was probably me, Barbara. I am always telling people not to use it. Also, don't use what's the other one that's my hobby horse? Recalls and holds. Don't use recalls. So.
Or marking cards lost.
Oh gosh, I hadn't even gotten into that one, but yeah, that one's weird too.
I don't think you can do that anymore. Okay,
good to know. I know there's still like a user profile that's lost card, but that's different, I think. But that does lead very, very nice segue into the next topic, which is kind of a discussion of sort of a, do we need a policy? ? Because we do not currently have one, but we kind of have a standard practice, which is the what can I change on other libraries' user accounts? The standard practice, as I understand it, is that most libraries, and this I am labeling this amnesty discussion, so this is a judgment-free zone. So if you tell me you're doing something wrong, and I will just say, interesting. But and also extend to your compatriots in this meeting the same courtesy of kind of, please no one yell at each other that that's not how you're supposed to be doing it. This will be kind of a judgment-free zone to collect what people are currently doing and willing to do. My understanding from talking to people in various committee meetings is that most libraries are like, I'm willing to change phone number, email, and possibly PIN on a user account, but nothing else for a user who is not one of my library's patrons. So two-part question is, does that sound correct to all of you? Is anyone willing to change more? Is anyone not willing to change those things? And then kind of the two-part question is, are you comfortable with other libraries making those changes on your user accounts? Are there any of those things? Basically, though, consent or and notes. I mean, adding notes to accounts. So I will entertain discussion. You may discuss in the chat, or you may unmute yourself and speak. But if you do unmute yourself and speak, please start by like identifying yourself in your library, just for those who might not know everyone. Okay, Lori says that what I mentioned is what we change. Okay.
I'd be for, this is Roxy, I'd be for put a note that someone's address has changed in another, but I haven't changed their address, but I will say patron says they now live at whatever.
Okay, that makes sense. Yes, Nick, you heard me right. Email, PIN, and phone. Okay, yeah, and adding a note to say that a patron has moved and stuff. So then that leads me to the next one is, if you find out that a patron has moved, or that there's some other type of problem on their account, but not something that the system is going to automatically block them for, so not something where, an item has gone overdue and they're blocked because of fines or something like that. There's some other reason that you cannot check out to this patron until a situation is resolved. So we'll call it a problem patron from another library, but we don't necessarily even really mean a problem. We may mean someone who has moved out of a district. This is the, how are you currently handling this situation? Have you encountered problems in other ways that it has been handled? Like, I would say, things like, are you changing their status to barred? Are you using a user profile? Are you just adding a note and hoping for the best? What are your current strategies? What would you like to see? And then is this something that I really would kind of like us to have a standard answer for, because I feel like it's an area where we end up with a lot of confusion, is kind of, how do I handle this patron who's moved out of my district? Or this patron who usually comes to me but has moved out of their home district and they need to get a new card, and I don't want to keep checking out to them until they've fixed it. So again, amnesty, and please don't yell at each other if you disagree with how each other are currently handling it. Everyone has equal capacity to be right or wrong about this. We will assume good intent. And if no one talks, I will just continue yammering on, because, that's fine too. Ooh, if someone made an obvious error on date of birth, should that be a library contact? Thoughts? Okay, yeah, we'll send it. Yeah, I mean, that may be something that comes up, of, you're working with a patron and you realize that the person standing in front of you is not 5 years old, and yet their date of birth says that they are. And I feel like that's something where I have probably definitely just fixed it, because I just assume it's a typo. But I mean, I probably shouldn't have done that, Oh, yeah, that's an interesting. I've been seeing an occasional issue with non-resident patrons trying to shop around for where they purchase their cards instead of going with the state rule about nearest public library in their school district. Not sure it's my place to put a note on the account. That one I would kind of maybe shy away from, just because it kind of gets into making a subjective call on, a suspicion, you know what I mean? But, and hopefully libraries are familiar enough with that rule that, if you receive a patron and you're not in fact the closest library or in their school district or otherwise covered by that commonality of community interest statement, that, Okay, well, I'm not seeing anyone jumping in too much in the chat. So it does sound like we have consensus about kind of, you know, these things you can change, these other things not. The date of birth thing, I mean, that may also be one where you may not want to, like, you know, you might just want to call the other library and be like, hey, I've got this patron in front of me. I think there's an error. Do you mind if I change it? You know, that sort of thing. You know, the way some libraries will call each other about an expiration date sometimes. And again, I know that's a common practice, like that if you have a patron whose card just expired a couple of days ago and they belong to another library, I know it's a relatively common practice to call that other library and say, you know, hey, can we do a 2-week renewal so they can check out, and then I'll send them to you. That's fine. You know, there are some things that you can resolve with a phone call, and some things you may want that you'll want to actually send them there for. You know, we all know it gets a little fuzzy, but you know.
In the past for the birth date one, I think I've done like check their ID, put the right birth date in, and then I put a note on there, you know, birth date said 95, should have been 85 or whatever, you know, but I went ahead and changed it anyway.
And I think that may be what I have done too. It has been, you know, if I've consulted their ID, it gets a little fuzzier in that area though. So I think if we decide that this is something that needs to be officially laid out in a policy, I think we'll probably leave it at, you may make changes to email, you may make changes to phone number, you may make changes to PIN. And then say, you know, for other changes, you know, call at minimum call the home library, you know, or send the patron to them for further account things. So but there's always weird edge cases. But I don't know. We'll see where we go. That'll be a point for more discussions. What about the problem patron situation? Do you use like a problem patron profile? Do you just bar them? I just kind of as a little bit of a survey, what are you currently doing? And then how would you feel about as a potential solution, because this is something that has come up at several various times in the past, and I have confirmed with Kendall that it is possible and something he would potentially be willing to do. This largely comes up at libraries with self-checks, because a patron who is in a barred status walks up to a self-check and scans their card and they get like a big red exclamation point that says they are barred, which sometimes is a real good way to start off a negative interaction. So as Nick has just started, he's using bar because it works to stop them at the self-check basically, but he would like a status that says something besides barred. And I have just spoken with Kendall to confirm that he would be willing to potentially create a status that says something softer than barred. What that is, you know, see staff, maybe something like that. And Beth, when I say problem patron in this context, I guess I don't really mean really a problem patron, you know, because like a patron who's a problem because they've got bills of plenty on their account, they're probably going to be barred and probably should be barred, you know, until their bills are resolved. I mean more the patron who has moved out of district, and so their account should not be active, but it's not because they did something wrong other than forgetting to update their address with their library. You know, exactly, a patron with issues. You know, if we were to add a status that says something to the effect of see staff, see desk, talk to me, whatever, you know, something softer than barred. Question A is, do we want that status to function the same way a barred status currently does, or would we want, there is a talk to me profile, but it's a profile. I'm talking about a user status. Because we do also have problem profile. The problem is not problem, but the thing with the profiles is they work a little differently, in the sense that basically the profiles of, I think, talk to me and I think problem, they're set up with a maximum checkouts allowed of 0. So instead of just popping up as like this patron is blocked or this patron is barred or this patron has a C desk status or whatever it is, it will pop up as if it's going to allow you to check out to them and then promptly tell you that they have too many checkouts, which has been confusing both in the self-check realm, but also kind of in the in workflows realm. It's just sort of a less clear function. Yeah, so, okay. Well, the problem with, sorry, I'm addressing something in the chat. I think something like talk to me status would be nice for trying to get patrons to update email addresses with staff in the case of a courtesy notice bouncing back as an example. The issue, well, and I guess my next question though is if we were to set up a C desk, a talk to me, whatever we end up deciding to call it, status, do we want it to function like barred, which is you cannot check out until you are out of this status? Or would we want it to function like blocked, which is checkouts can be done with an override? This is not necessarily something we have to have an answer to and resolved today, but something to consider is kind of how hard a line do you want that status to be? And so using, if we were to set this up like barred, then that may be kind of too extreme for someone when we just need a new email. But maybe blocked isn't, but it's also going to prevent them from doing online renewals. So I would say this status is probably something that should be used in situations where the account is basically not valid until they clear it, like a address situation. So if you don't have any thoughts or discussion on it now, it's okay if you just want to mull this over. Okay, Nick doesn't have strong feelings because it would stop the self-check either way. So, okay, that's one thing to take into consideration. This is probably something we'll have more conversation about. In this group, do the gentler the better, okay, so maybe blocked. Could there be two, one softer than the other? I kind of don't want too many. I guess because we already have, blocked it and barred. I don't know. I mean, like I said, we don't have to solve this right now, but also something I would like y'all to be mulling over. But I guess also, just because it is something that comes up a lot and can create confusion and potential clashes between libraries is kind of the, you barred my patron. Why'd you bar my patron? And it's like, well, they've actually moved out of your district, so they're technically not your patron anymore. But it has been areas of friction in the past, and so I guess I would like for there to be a more unified method of dealing with it, because then we could like actually do cheat sheets and stuff on how to address this. But right now it's kind of like some libraries use a problems profile, some use a barred status, and it's just we're not all over the map. It's mostly one of those two options. Oh well, some also will expire a patron. So whether it's other libraries or not, and that's another area of, So I guess if we were to say this is the approved method of doing this, you change their status to talk to me or whatever we settle on, would y'all be willing to kind of, the standardization of that? Is that something that y'all would be on board with, I guess? Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that this is helpful, Allie. Yeah. If you ever want, there's probably more than a few people who would be happy to tell you all about their self-check experience. Does anyone have a way of handling it currently that's sort of not what we're talking about, that they're very, very attached to? What should we do in the case of a patron migrating to another library for a new card? Their former library card has major financial issues and duplicate check didn't catch the error during the new card issuance process. Ooh, in that one, you should, in that situation, like assuming if you are the new card, if you are the new library, if it were me and I were the new library and I'd issued them a card and then gone, oops, they owe Galesburg $300. I would put a note on the, this is what I personally would do. There may be other strategies. I personally would put a note on their account. I would bar the card and I would refer the patron back to the library that they owe the money to. is probably what I would do. Because because I would end up referring them to that library in any case, to figure out, like, are they willing to take a replacement? Are they willing to maybe reduce the bills? Are they bills? Are they fines? If I were feeling very, very generous, I would maybe call the other library to have that conversation first and tell the patron, but also, yeah. No, I totally understand asking, Carla. Yeah, so I mean, ideally you catch this before issuing the barcode at all, in a perfect world. And
if it was the other way around, if I was looking at my patron and they owed me $300 and then I saw that they went somewhere else and were issued a new card, I would immediately call that library and be like, hey, this is a duplicate
No.
patron. They owe me
Right.
money. Can you please block their card? And ask them to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say if you do become aware, like if you catch it before you've issued them a card, then it is probably worth adding a note to the existing account with the new contact info, though. That way they do have, the current contact info somewhere. I would say in a perfect world, though, you catch it before you even issue the card. I mean, I guess there have been times, though, that I've been working with a patron who was kind of like, ooh, yeah, in a perfect world, you're catching it in advance, and hopefully even before they've even filled out paperwork. In a perfect world, and you can say, oh, you've got some stuff you're going to need to clear up. But I mean, there have been times that I've been working with a patron and they've been like, oh, I know I have that. Oh, I've been meaning to get with them, and it seemed like they were going to make a good faith effort, but I would be like, okay, but this card is not going to be active until you do that, Or if it was something like they desperately needed to get on the computer, but I was like, you're not going to be able to take materials until then. Yeah, and Carla has said that she would appreciate the cautionary phone call if it is the, original library that has caught it. So, and I think most libraries would, if you happen to catch that someone's accidentally issued, the patron who owes you money a card, I think a lot of people would probably appreciate that call. I will just always, my rule of thumb is assume good intentions, kind of. So if you see that someone else has issued you your problem patron a card, and I mean actually problem patron a card, I would say probably best to operate on the assumption that this was an honest mistake and not that someone is trying to, get around it, at least an honest mistake on the library's part. And Nick points out that check duplicate user is spotty at best, and this is why in all of my trainings, if you've been to them, I make a big point of recommending that you do a name search, for the patrons before you even begin processing the application. Also, just because I've been yelled at by enough people who have filled out like 5 applications for their entire family, waited for me to enter them all, and then I've found the $300 they owe to Alpha Park. It's a lot easier if I find that before they've done the paperwork. So just for a little, little tip there. The earlier in the process you catch it, sometimes it's sort of like the easier it can go. Because, all right. Have we discussed that to death? All right, we're getting close enough to it on the agenda that I'm gonna chat at Kendall to get him on deck.
I'm here.
Oh, haha, look at that. Have you been here the whole time, or did you just time that very, very well?
I've been here about 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, the next thing I have on the agenda is just a real quick heads up about an oncoming cleanup project with, what is it called? That thing, Kendall, what is that thing called? Data control. We are able to generate reports of things where there's only one item on a record, but there are holds and the item is in a, missing location. So now that we can generate those lists, we're going to do a little cleanup project of these so-called zombie holds, because these are situations where the hold will never be able to be filled because there's only one item that can fill it, and that item is in lost status or something like that. So this is just a heads up of, incoming cleanup project. What we'll probably do is generate one big list, sort it by library, and send it out to the listserv. So if you get those, it will be the patron's home library that we will want to basically be the one to take action on this, because if you're following up with the patron to see about getting the item another way, only the home library could do can initiate like an OCLC, world share, whatever request for them. So we'll ask that the home library will do that. But heads up, upcoming cleanup project coming. So now for the exciting thing. Have I switched my share correctly to the draft reciprocity policy? Sweet. Okay. So based on the conversations that we have had in users group, in this committee, in policy subcommittee, the Cirque policy subcommittee has come up with a very, 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 I cannot state this enough, very preliminary reciprocity policy draft, which we think kind of encompasses the direction that we want to go, while also being more truly a policy and not diving too much into the nitty-gritty realm of procedure and standards and things like that. I asked Kendall to join us for this part of the meeting because this does tie so closely into a lot of the item type standardization project potentially, and all of that. So he will probably chime in at some point. I know he's got a survey that he's working on that he will be interested in getting feedback from. But
Also about reciprocity partially.
Yes. Yes. So he will want to promote his upcoming survey to get, feedback. But the draft version of this policy, basically kind of what we were hearing is sort of a greater willingness to share than has previously been the culture, which is good. So we are kind of approaching this more as statement of intent, sort of. So we begin the policy by pointing out that our official recommendation is that member libraries share all circulating item types. There are some very obvious exceptions to this stuff, like please don't send out your fragile historical irreplaceable volumes in delivery. Take that as given, but generally speaking, we recommend that everybody share everything. And then we point out that you have hold rules that govern which item types will be shared with other member libraries to fulfill holds. And then basically we're saying, please set up your hold rules to reflect what you're actually willing to send. If you are never sending DVDs out to fill holds, then you should have a hold rule that says your DVDs are local holds only, and then that way it's sort of predictable that you don't share those item types. If a library has a hold rule that excludes a certain item type or a Cirque rule that prevents the checkout of that item type, then workflows should not allow holds to be placed on that item type. This is the part where there's sort of we know workflows work somewhat imperfectly, but in theory, it should not allow those holds to be placed. And then that if you have restrictions, you should do your best to educate your patrons about what those restrictions are. So like, we don't send out any of our audiobooks. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to place holds on audiobooks for you, from other libraries. If you receive an item in delivery to fulfill a hold, even if workflows should have prevented the hold, you are permitted to circulate the item to the patron, because one of the things we saw a lot of was frustration from the sending library saying, I sent this item to my patron to another library, and then they sent it right back to me, but I was fine with them having it, and it felt like not enough work to, it felt like just a silly amount of work to send it only to have it be turned around and sent back. So we had a lot of libraries kind of say that. So basically what this policy says is that if workflows lets you place the hold, then you can place the hold. If it shows up on your pick list, then you can send it out to fill the hold. And if you get it in delivery, then you can have it. So now I'm ready for your, I don't know,
Clarification.
pushback, discussion, clarification. Kendall?
I have some clarification on this. So number one, reciprocity rules in workflows do not work. and they don't work, the same reason why many other things that workflows lets a staff member do would be you consider as not maybe what you want to happen. And that's because workflows assumes that staff members know what they're doing and are doing things that are allowed.
Mhm.
So the way reciprocity works, when we talk about system enforced reciprocity in RSA CAT or RSA CAT mobile, when a patron is logged into RSA CAT and tries to place a hold on a book, that is when the system goes, oh, does your library allow holds or not? Does your library only do local holds or not? And then it evaluates the record that the patron is attempting to place a hold on and mostly makes the right decision, not all the time makes the right decision. Part of the reason why it doesn't always make the right decision is because our cataloging is not enforced, and therefore we can't tell the system specifically do or do not. So part of the reason why I went to such great lengths to try and define what a policy is and what a standard is and a guide and all of that is because the policy, which is what we're working on or looking at today, is how things should be. This is what we agree we want to happen in RSA. Then we try and implement the policy as best we can in the system. And so we've been talking about item types for new items at the last couple of users groups. I'm going to send out a survey today, and it asks a lot of questions about new items and how libraries deal with reciprocity for items coming to them and also for patrons walking into your library as well. So I just wanted to clarify that a staff member placing a hold in workflows, the only hard stop on that hold for a staff member in workflows is if the only item that would fill the hold is set to no holds. That's basically the stop.
So there would still be, we should potentially add a line that is sort of, you should be familiar with your library's own, maybe a corollary to the libraries with restrictions should inform their patrons of these limits. You should also not place holds that do not meet your incoming, your recipe, you know what I mean. Y'all probably don't know what I mean. I should probably say that right. If you have restrictions on which items you are willing to send out, then you and your staff should be familiar with your own internal sharing limitations and not place holds on items that violate that, I guess. We did have a question in the chat that's if library A still owns audiobooks on cassette or VHS, and a patron from library B that no longer owns those items tries to place a hold on RSA CAT for that type of material, is reciprocity an issue? No, right?
Generally, no. Correct.
Because it's looking at hold rules, not.
If that patron's home library recently owned those items and just isn't using that item type anymore and has not informed us that they're no longer using that item type, there may be a holdover rule in there. But in the last 2 years, James has gone through both the hold map and the Cirque map. So we think we've gotten rid of most of those cases. And just as a little preview of the survey, looking at libraries' usage of the 20 item types that are associated with new items, most libraries are only using a couple, like 3. When we first implemented holds 13, 14, whatever, 26 million years ago, in 2008, when we implemented holds, libraries had upwards of 15 different item types associated with holds. Everyone, I was actually very surprised doing the in-depth research for this. Everybody's really backed off on what they're limiting and what they're not limiting. And it's basically, we do no holds or local holds on new books. We do either no holds or local holds on new videos. And movies, still a lot of libraries do local holds on movies. And that's really outside of like specialized equipment stuff. That's really it. So we have all of these rules and all of these item types that we're all still trying to consider as a very complex thing. But when I look at how things are actually being used in the system right now, the only complexity is the fact that we have all of these item types not being used consistently in the group, like the group as a whole. Individual libraries are pretty much using them consistently inside of their library, but because they're not using them the same as another library might be using them, that's where we're having the problems with the reciprocity, especially for new items. So that's what we've talked about at users group a couple times, and we're trying to fix at a system level, and that's what my survey will be discussing when it comes out, hopefully later today.
Yeah. So from the floor, any other discussion about that? Mostly please stay tuned for Kendall's survey and reply, but I mean, the goal in a lot of ways really is to kind of make it simpler, you know, sort of, you know, save y'all from having to, you know, check a holds map and, you know, look at an item and, you know, go down a deep rabbit hole before you can even decide whether to send it, you know. Okay. Okay, oddities with Wonder Book item types or how someone. Okay. Yeah. And this, you know, may be the beginning of, you know, the conversation about standardizing new book item types, may be the beginning of standardizing further item types. Who knows? But I think seems like new books are definitely the one that was most obviously in need of and the most likely to affect the reciprocity and the, you know, the way the whole map works.
And just for a fun little question, everybody type into the chat window how many item types you think our system has for books. Just books.
Yeah, not all materials, just book item types.
I will say.
Are we doing prices right rules?
If we're doing
closest
prices
without
right
going
rules,
over,
we only have one winner.
Yeah.
The actual number is we have 31 item types associated with juvenile YA and adult. Juvenile YA adult large print books.
Okay.
31.
That's
I think we have just under 200 item types total, but that might be
okay.
wrong.
Well,
a lot.
Well, I guess the good news is that everyone here thought the problem was worse than it is. So you've all been pleasantly surprised, except for Lisa. Sorry, Lisa. But also, though, 31 does seem like maybe a few too many, tiny bit excessive. All right. Okay. Well, if you have any further discussion on this topic that you would like to embark on while Kendall is here, I suggest unmuting yourself and shouting quickly or starting to type rapidly. But otherwise, we will go to the part of the thing that I forgot to put on the agenda, but hopefully y'all are starting to assume it by now, is the open discussion forum for whatever y'all would like to discuss, if you have anything. And if not, okay, yeah, one of the questions is the issue that folks are using item types the way other libraries prefer to use home locations or like genre tags? Huh?
Somewhat. In a couple of cases, yes. The answer to that is yes. I think what the bigger issue is was that many years ago in the past, before everybody went fine free, before everybody decided that maybe simpler was better on checkout rules and let's kind of standardize around a 2 or 3 week checkout, that a lot of libraries were checking out movies 4 or 5 different ways, books 4 or 5 different ways with different, maybe not different checkout lengths, but sometimes different fee structures for different, types of people, or different holdability rules. And so every time you change one of those things about how a book is held or about the way a book circulates, if you have two items and they need to circulate or be held differently, you have to have 2 different item types. And because we used to have much, much more complex circulation rules in many places, we were kind of forced to add in more and more and more item types to make that work. There are a few libraries that use lots of different item types for statistical purposes, to break out DVDs by, the MPA rating or whatever it's called, or to break out, is it a book special with or a book series, or a book that was a rental book at one point in time. And so as libraries pulled back from having so many circulation rules, they stopped using some item types, but basically used whatever their predominant item type was. And so we've ended up with many fewer item types being used overall, but again, kind of fragmentation on what any particular item type means across a wide section of libraries. The nice thing about new items, because of how new items are being used in almost all of our libraries, even if we were to say, hey, we're going to come up with all brand new item types for new items, it would be a fairly simple project to help everybody do bulk changes so that everything was set up correctly. And then boom, we'd be done.
Let's see. Just catching up with the chat here. Our Wonder Book collection is still very small. We don't send them yet until our collection grows. It feels like a step backward for us to even begin to build this collection if it keeps our patrons from placing holds. A little bit of a struggle we're having. I'm on board with Jenny. Our library only has 12 Wonder Books. The problem I'm having is one patron keeps placing holds on RSA Cat for those other libraries' Wonder Books, because those libraries have them classified as play away instead of, yeah, and that is something where reciprocity will not work right if things are cataloged as not the item type that everyone else is using. But yeah, I mean, that's a situation when you're beginning to build a very small collection where it may make sense to have a no holds on these rule, our official stance is that we recommend that you share all circulating item types, but we understand that there are existing exceptions that are much larger than, a small specific item type collection, but yeah. And then item types they don't own, like video games. Okay. Concern still revolves around libraries borrowing item types that they don't own, like video games and playaways. Video cassettes. Right. Well, and I think this is an area where, yeah. Okay.
See also DVDs cataloged on Blu-ray records, or Blu-rays cataloged on DVD records.
Yeah. And yeah, okay. All right.
Does anyone else have anything for me? If not, I'm going to fill your inbox with a glorious survey. Set aside 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay. Okay, this is your open discussion time forum. Does anyone have any recent triumphs they would like to share? Really outstandingly weird reference questions? Anything you would like to source the wisdom of the collective brain about, or whatever? You may unmute yourself and talk or put it in the chat. And thank you for coming, Cheryl. Have a great day. But, if we have two people try to talk at once, I will try to mediate. Right now, Allie, under the existing policy, sorry, I'm answering a question in the chat if you want to read up to get caught up. Under the current policy, the policy says that what you should do is notify the patron that that item doesn't meet your reciprocity standards and send it back to the owning library. That said, we acknowledge that many libraries do not do this, and we are currently just beginning to discuss a new version of the policy that would say you could still check it out to your patron. So I will just, yeah. I guess officially under the current policy, no, but potentially yes, under the potential not yet approved new policy. So we're in a little bit of weird policy limbo right now. So take from that response whatever you want, I guess. Don't send Galesburg video games if you don't want them to check them out, I guess. We'll make that the takeaway. Yeah, it's all weird and fuzzy, and we would like reciprocity to work better so that you can just keep it and check it out.
Anna, this is
Yeah.
Beth over at the Lily M. Evans Library. And the discussion for this draft, there is no place in there that talks about the importance of the library that has the restrictions training their staff.
Yeah, that was one of the things we were saying we need to add to the informing the patrons that we'll add a line about trainings, making sure that staff are aware of your own restrictions and know not to in workflows place holds on items that don't meet those, basically. So that's something that we will be adding probably to that same bullet point, or possibly as a separate one, depending on how much text it needs. And then the nitty gritty of how to do that will probably be a procedure document. If you're placing a hold on an item type that your library does not send out to fill hold, you should, limit it to library or group or something like that, So the nitty gritty of the how will be a separate document, but sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. The nitty gritty of how will be a procedure document, whereas this will be kind of the statement of intent that you should make sure that your staff is educated in the proper way to place holds on item types that you may have restrictions on, basically. And then one person is saying that they do find it helpful when owning libraries have new stickers on their materials so that you kind of know whether, this is a good point, and this is why new materials is sort of a hobby horse, because if you're the receiving library and you get a book, it's a bit labor intensive to find out whether the library that sent it to you considers it new or not sometimes. But then sometimes libraries might have a new book sticker on it but not actually consider it new from the collection. You know what I mean? They might not have it as a new item type, you know, because if they don't actually circulate them differently, but just have a different shelving location, they might just have the sticker. This is part of why new books are kind of where we're starting with this, is because they're the area where it gets so complicated. But, and that different libraries have different lengths of time that they consider things new, just to double check. So it's exciting and fun. And I mean, when you have 144 libraries, then it's not surprising that people do things a little bit differently. Okay. And Fond du Lac, apparently they just do everything by home location. All books are books, all DVDs are DVD, which, you know, also a completely fair approach. You know, if you don't have special rules on the different things, then, you know. Okay, abiding by my usual policy of being quiet until it got awkward. Does anyone have anything else that you would like to discuss or share? Is everyone ready for spring? Yeah, I have not yet encountered anyone who's like, you know what my favorite month is? February. You know, I don't think that's a thing that anyone has ever said. Yeah, it is currently snowing. Not thrilled. All right, well, anyone have anything else to share? Otherwise, I will call it and send you back to your afternoon. Okay, well, please respond to Kindle's survey. Have a great week. Send tickets to the help desk if you have questions. Hoping for everyone involved that the MTCO outage is resolved soon, and hoping that everyone else's internet stays good. Knock on wood, lest I jinx y'all. Okay, well then I will end the meeting and have a lovely afternoon. Thank you all for coming.